Liam Anders stood completely still, one hand suspended midair over a steel filing cabinet that hadn't been touched in decades. The air in the archive room smelled like mildew and forgotten secrets, like something alive had once breathed in. Here and then chose to die quiet. Dust swirled in shafts of light from a broken ceiling panel, painting the floor in fractured golden veins, and yet all Liam could hear, louder than the thrum of blood in his own ears, was a single sentence. That had no right existing. She only wanted one. It hadn't been written, not on paper, not on any file or document. It was whispered, barely audible, through an old military-grade headset that hadn't been plugged in for years. He hadn't turned it on. He hadn't even touched it. But there it was. A woman's voice, non-human, cold as metal. And trembling beneath that perfect cadence was a hunger that felt older than war. You ever open something that makes the back of your neck burn like you just got caught doing something wrong? Not just illegal, worse, something cosmic. That's what this feels like. You're not just watching a story tonight. You're inside something someone tried to bury under alien treaties and dead languages and locked steel rooms 8 miles beneath Arizona desert rock. Something meant to be unremembered. Because one human returned, and that was the problem. It started with a single breach report from an off-world mission, censored to hell and back, marked under 16 different clearance levels, but Liam found it, filed under the wrong year, misdated by an entire decade, like it didn't want to be found, but hadn't yet learned how to disappear completely. The timestamp said 0200 hours. The footage showed nothing but stars shifting slow behind the silhouette of a spacecraft no one remembered building. Then, 2 frames. Just 2. The static snapped, and there he was. Major Dean Travers, declared missing 3 years ago on Iller Prime, last seen during the failed diplomatic mission with the Jean-Marie, the mission where the alien queen was said to have demanded an army. She got none. Until now, except Travers wasn't in uniform. No battle wounds, no aging, nothing. He stepped off the ship like time had never touched him, like he hadn't vanished into a war-zone black hole 3 years prior. But his eyes were wrong, not possessed, not glowing or bleeding black, just aware. Like he'd learned something no human mind should have been able to hold. And as he walked past the retrieval crew, silent and slow, a baby on the base, a newborn, not yet 3 weeks old, cried out a single word that had never been spoken in the entire facility before. Viralai. No one knew what it meant, not then. But you're about to. Here's where I lost sleep, and maybe you will too. 30 hours later, that baby disappeared from a locked room. No signs of forced entry. Security footage scrubbed down to static. The only audio recovered, corrupted but chillingly clear, was the voice of a woman, soft and metallic, repeating the same thing Liam had heard. She only wanted one. We thought she meant a battalion. We were wrong. There's more, so much more. But this next part, the part that tore apart the last man who tried to speak it, is something no one ever connected until now. Dean Travers wasn't the only thing that returned. Something came back with him. Something older than the war. Something that knew our names, long before we ever dared whisper hers. And as for Liam Anders, well, he never left that archive room. Not really. His body's still, in there, eyes open, staring at nothing. But the last message he sent before everything blacked out was one line. Not a warning, not a plea, just a question no one's dared ask until now. What if the alien queen didn't want an army? She wanted a mirror. And then everything. You think you know every war, every treaty, every tale of first contact starts to look like a recruitment plan. So ask yourself, real quiet, real slow, what did we actually give her when we sent a human back? The moment Liam's message blinked onto the screen, the one question, raw and brittle as broken glass, something inside me cracked, like the world had quietly pulled its breath back and held it in a place no light could reach. What if the alien queen didn't want an army? She wanted a mirror. Those words didn't just hang in the sterile hum of the archive room. They burrowed in, grinding against the edges of what I thought was real, what I knew. Because after that, everything slipped sideways. I replayed the footage of Dean Travers over and over. Each time, a tiny fragment seemed to shift, just enough to unsettle my bones. One moment, his eyes held that cold, ancient knowing. Then a flicker of confusion, a hesitation that wasn't there before. And the baby's cry, the single impossible word, virilai, it morphed too. Sometimes it was clear as a bell, other times it warped into something unrecognizable, like static, scratching over a hidden frequency. My mind tried to pin down these inconsistencies, but each attempt just tangled me deeper in a web I wasn't sure I wanted to see. The more I dug, the more I found gaps. Snippets of audio files erased without explanation, security tapes with random frames missing, logs that vanished from the system overnight. I started hearing things too. Subtle glitches in recordings, whispers just beneath the noise floor that twisted words into something darker. They didn't belong in any official report, and yet I kept hearing them when I was alone. The cold, metallic voice repeating, "She only wanted one," but layered beneath it, something almost human, a tremor of desperation, like a scream strangled, before it could escape. That's when I met Harper. She showed up unannounced, slipping into the same cold archives I'd been crawling through like a ghost chasing shadows. Her presence was a paradox, steady but erratic, clear-eyed but twitchy, like she was both here and somewhere else entirely. Harper claimed she'd worked with Travers before he disappeared, but something about her story felt fractured. Details didn't line up, names were wrong, timelines bled into one another like ink smudged on wet paper. And yet, when she looked at me, there was a familiarity that wasn't comforting, more like a mirror cracking under pressure, reflecting a version of myself I didn't recognize. She started sharing her memories, or what she insisted were memories, of the mission. But with every sentence, the ground shifted beneath us. According to Harper, Travers never came back alone. Or maybe he never left. Or perhaps he never existed in the way I thought he did. I wanted to believe her, but doubt seeped into my bones like cold water. Was Harper a witness or a participant in something far darker? And was I losing my grip on what was true? The strangest part was the way my own memories began to betray me. I'd catch myself forgetting small things, key pieces of evidence I'd been sure I had, entire conversations that vanished like smoke from a fire. Sometimes I'd hear voices that weren't there, or glimpse shadows moving just beyond the edge of my vision. I couldn't tell if it was exhaustion or something worse. Each night my dreams twisted into fragments of that metallic whisper, tangled with images of a child speaking words no one should ever know, and a man who looked at me like he was searching for his own lost reflection. Harper's presence was both a lifeline and a threat. She'd lean close, voice dropping to a harsh whisper, warning me not to trust the official reports, not to believe the comforting lies we'd been fed about the failed mission. "They're hiding something," she said, eyes darting too. The locked door like it might shatter at any second. The truth behind what no one tells you isn't just out there. It's inside us, fractured, bleeding into everything we think we remember. And then she'd laugh, a short, bitter sound that didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to scream at her to stop, to tell me what was real. But maybe she couldn't even tell herself. Or maybe she was the last thread holding together the frayed edges of a story no one was supposed to piece together. Then came the recordings. Hidden. Files buried beneath layers of encrypted data. Harper helped me unlock them, but as we listened, the voices shifted again. Travers speaking in a calm, steady tone, except his words contradicted every report I'd ever read. He talked about things no one should have known, biological mirrors, neural graphs, a presence that didn't just command armies but infected minds. And behind his voice, layered beneath like a whisper beneath a scream, was the alien queen's, soft, patient, waiting. I began to question if the mirror was something physical, or if it was us, our minds, our fears, our broken psyches, twisted by something beyond comprehension. Were we seeing the true horror, or just the reflection of our own unraveling? Harper and I stopped trusting the tapes, the reports, even ourselves. Every answer folded back into a new question. Every revelation a deeper shadow, and all the while the silence around us grew heavier, as if the walls themselves were listening. One night, as the hum of the archive's ancient ventilation system droned on, Harper looked at me and said something that chilled me to the bone. "They don't want you to remember because you're part of the mirror now. The question isn't what she wanted, but what we became when she looked back." I felt it then, the weight of every erased memory, every distorted recording, every sleepless hour. The truth was no longer a distant mystery but a living, breathing nightmare tangled with the very fabric of who I was. And just as I reached for my phone to record everything, the screen flickered and went black. For a moment the silence wasn't empty, it was waiting. Then, from the dark, a whisper so close I could feel the breath on my skin. "You only see what she lets you." Everything I thought I knew shattered in that breath, and I realized the real unsolved mystery wasn't out there, in some distant war zone or forgotten archive. It was here, inside the fragile shards of memory and fear, inside the quiet spaces between what they tell you and what they hide. The question that no one wants you to ask is this: if the alien queen demands a mirror and that mirror is us, what do we see when we finally stop looking away? It was late when I finally thought I had it, when all the fractured pieces of a puzzle I didn't know I was solving clicked into a shape I could almost recognize. The archive was silent except for the low hum of old ventilation and the distant creak of settling pipes, but inside my head, every sound felt amplified, like my own heartbeat pounding beneath cracked glass. I was sure this was the hidden truth, the one thread that, if pulled, would unravel the whole knot and let me see clearly at last. Harper's shaky voice on the call earlier had steadied for once, as if even she dared to hope. We'd found a lost file buried deep beneath years of digital dust, misfiled and encrypted, containing what seemed like a debrief from the first contact mission with the alien queen species, something that directly mentioned the mirror, the army, and a long-ago event that no one had connected to this nightmare. The document described a covert experiment from decades before, a clandestine military project in a small town in West Virginia, Cedar Hollow, a place erased from most maps, replaced in government records with a generic training facility. What made the report chilling wasn't just the mention of the alien presence, but how the experimenters had tried to replicate the alien queen's power. They called it Project Reflection, a name meant to be cryptic but now screaming in hindsight. According to the report, the goal was to create a living mirror, a human host that could reflect and amplify alien consciousness to control or manipulate others. The project failed, at least officially. The entire town vanished off the records after a catastrophic event no one talked about. I stared at the words, the typeface jagged on my screen, as if trembling under the weight of what it revealed. This was the origin of everything, the source of the memory glitches, the whispers, the missing files. It was a hidden truth, a thread of light in the endless dark, promising an answer to the mystery that had devoured so much of my sanity. The muck file described survivors, those who'd lost their minds or bodies to the experiment's failure, fragmented memories leaking into the collective consciousness of those who came after, seeping into every corner of the government, every archive, every secret. The mirror wasn't just metaphorical. It was a psychological weapon designed to fracture reality itself. For a moment, I breathed again. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe I wasn't losing myself in a spiral of paranoia and alien conspiracies. Maybe the reason no one wanted me to remember was because the truth was too dangerous, too raw, too much like looking into a broken mirror and seeing the jagged pieces of your own soul staring back. "You're not crazy. They lied to you," I whispered aloud, a mantra to steady the fracture spreading beneath my skin. But then something else surfaced, a detail buried so deep I almost missed it, buried in the fine print of a footnote, a name twisted and half erased by time, Evelyn, a woman, a child, a ghost. The same name that had slipped from the lips of that vanished baby. The same name whispered in the static of corrupted audio files. Virili wasn't just a word. It was a distorted echo of Evelyn, the girl who disappeared during Project Reflection. According to scattered half-burned testimonies buried in the file, Evelyn had been the first living mirror, the original host meant to hold the alien consciousness. She hadn't survived, or rather, she hadn't left. The past wasn't past. It was bleeding into now. I felt it before I saw it, the shift in the room, the air thickening like syrup, the soft brush of something watching, waiting just beyond sight. The archives grew colder, and Harper's voice came through my earpiece, shaky and distant. "Liam, you need to see this." I turned, heart hammering, to find her standing behind me, eyes wide and unblinking, face pale as if she'd glimpsed something that fractured her world. She pulled out a faded photograph from her jacket, a grainy image of a small girl, pale and still, standing in front of a shattered mirror. The glass was spiderwebbed with cracks, but in the reflection, something dark and shifting lurked behind. Evelyn's eyes. Something wrong. "She never left the mirror," Harper said, voice barely above a whisper, and that's when the footage on the monitors around us glitched violently, the images fracturing and reassembling like shards of broken reality. A face flickered in the static, half-formed and watching. Not the alien queen, but something else. Something older, colder, watching from the shadows of every file, every forgotten corner. It didn't have a name. It didn't need one. It was the silent force that had been there all along. The reason. Memories slipped and voices warped, the force twisting the mirror itself. I reached out to steady the monitors as the feed fractured again, and my own reflection wavered on the screen, broken and multiplied like Evelyn's shattered glass. I wasn't sure if I was looking at myself or the thing beneath the surface, the thing that had watched me from the beginning, threading through every whispered word and missing file. That moment changed everything. The answers I thought I'd found dissolved like smoke, pulling me back into a deeper, darker maze. The hidden truth was not a single thread to follow, but a fractal nightmare, a memory glitch looping endlessly inside my mind and the world around me. What they don't want you to remember isn't just a secret. It's a trap. The past was never behind us. It was folded into our very perception, a poison seeping from the edges of reality. And as the last flicker of the monitors died, I realized something terrifying. The entire story, the missing man, the vanished baby, the whispered name, the alien queen's hunger for a mirror. It wasn't a new invasion or a conspiracy confined to some dark corner of space. It was a wound we'd carried for decades, a fracture in our collective mind, and we'd been living through it all along without knowing what to call it. The question that started this nightmare didn't end it. It opened a door, and now, as I stare back at my fractured reflection, the door is closing. You'll want to watch this again. Every frame, every whisper, every glitch, because the truth isn't just hidden in what's shown. It's buried in what you thought you saw but couldn't remember until now. The mirror is more than a metaphor. It's the story we never wanted to face. And it's watching, still watching. I thought I was alone in this. That the cracks splintering my reality, the fractured memories and whispered voices clawing at the edges of my mind, were some cruel, solitary curse. But the truth, when it finally crept from the shadows, was far darker, far more intimate than I could have imagined. There are others, not scattered or random, but connected by something unseen, a thread running beneath the surface of our waking lives, binding us into a silent network of watchers and haunted witnesses who know the weight of what we've uncovered, but have nowhere safe to speak it aloud. They've been watching this story unfold just as closely as I have, moving through the same shadowed corridors of truth and doubt, piecing together fragments nobody was supposed to see, whispering messages only the most alert among us could ever decode. It began with the messages. At first, strange bursts of static on my phone, a crackled voice murmuring over the interference with words that almost made sense but not quite. Then came symbols, scratched hastily into margins of documents, scrawled on dusty windows in the dead of night, glowing faintly in the flicker of the monitors. A fractured circle, a shattered mirror, a spiral folding in on itself like a black hole devouring light. No one explained their meaning, but the pattern was unmistakable. A secret language woven into the fabric of the silence around us, waiting to be cracked. The internet became a graveyard of half-erased posts and cryptic forums filled with disjointed thoughts and sudden warnings that vanished as quickly as they appeared, as if someone or something was erasing evidence of a larger design. The dreams started next. They're impossible to describe but impossible to ignore. The shared nightmares where we meet, or perhaps just think we do, in spaces that are never quite real. Walls bending in on themselves, faces flickering between familiar and alien, voices that slip between words and pure feeling. I've talked to some of them. These unseen companions who wake with the same haunted eyes and tangled memories, their identities slipping like mist around the edges, unsure if what they saw was real or a trick of the mind. It's as if the same force that shattered the mirror of my mind reaches into theirs, pulling us all into the same tangled web of fear and silence. There's a third perspective I keep coming back to, the one I can't fully trust, but perhaps the only one who sees clearly. A voice from the margins calling themselves the observer, a presence that watches not just from behind the glass, but through it, like a reflection that sees what we cannot. The observer speaks in riddles and warnings, dropping fragments of found footage from 20 years ago, footage the government never released, hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and denial, images of people disappearing, distorted broadcasts of impossible phenomena, reports that contradict everything official sources claim. They say the truth isn't a place or a secret but a state of mind, a labyrinth of fractured identities where control is an illusion and memory is the battleground. With every message, every shared dream, every piece of forbidden footage, the question grows heavier. Who are we, really? Are we merely hosts, mirrors reflecting a deeper force that watches, shapes and controls us? Or are we fragments of a larger consciousness unraveling, slipping through cracks in the facade to glimpse the unspeakable truth lurking beneath? The boundaries between self and other, memory and fabrication, choice and compulsion blur until it's impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. You were right all along to doubt what you were shown, to feel that gnawing suspicion that reality is only a surface layer hiding something far more insidious. And now, as these threads tighten and the shadows deepen, I feel the weight of unseen eyes, not just on me, but on all of us. The watchers are patient and the silence they demand is absolute, but we are awakening. The mirror has cracked wider, and through its fractures we glimpse not just the alien queen or the vanished Evelyn, but something older, darker, watching from the edge of perception, waiting to fold us back into the silence we tried to escape. The question is no longer whether we can find the truth, but whether the truth will let us find ourselves. In the heavy silence that followed my latest discovery, a truth settled over me, not like a revelation struck by lightning, but more like the slow, inevitable sinking of a stone into a dark, still pond. I had spent so long chasing answers, what happened, who was behind it, why no one remembered, that I never paused to ask the deeper question, the one that now throbbed beneath every fractured memory and whisper. Why? Why had this shadow fallen? Across so many lives, why had the mirror been shattered? And why had the alien queen demanded something so impossible? An army of reflections. The answer, when it came, wasn't a tidy secret or a government cover-up. It was raw, messy, and achingly human. The mirror wasn't just a weapon or a tool or a cosmic accident. It was a reflection of ourselves, our fear, our need for connection and control, the unbearable loneliness that drives us to reach beyond our limits, even when it destroys us. In the end, the alien queen's hunger wasn't for power over others. It was for recognition, for being seen. To be reflected not as a monstrous other, but as something part of the same fragile, trembling existence. I found myself standing before a shard of glass larger than I imagined, the edges sharp enough to cut. Holding it felt like holding the entire universe's weight, the fractured reflections of every memory I'd lost, every whisper I'd heard, every face I'd seen in the darkness. And then, from the deepest recesses of my mind, came a confession I had buried beneath layers of fear and denial. I am part of the mirror, too. The fractured pieces of my identity, the missing moments, the creeping dread, they weren't signs of weakness or madness. They were the threads binding me to something far greater, something terrifying, something profoundly personal. Harper's voice broke through the silence, trembling with a vulnerability I hadn't heard before. "Maybe it's not about what we've lost," she said softly, eyes glistening with unshed tears, "but what we've become, what we're meant to be. Maybe this breaking isn't destruction. Maybe it's awakening." I wanted to reject it, to cling to the illusion of control, to believe that the story would end with answers and closure. But standing there, with the mirror's fractured face staring back at me, I realized the truth might destroy me, or save me, depending on the choice I made. To deny it was to remain trapped in darkness, fractured and forgotten. To accept it was to step into the unknown, to embrace the terrifying awakening of seeing myself not as a victim or a survivor, but as a part of the endless reflection, the living echo of what had come before and what would come after. The air thickened, the room dissolving into shadows and light, memory and dream intertwining like smoke, and I understood then that this wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter, a shift in the very fabric of identity and reality, where the lines between self and other, past and future, truth and illusion blurred until all that remained was the raw, aching pulse of being human. And in that moment, as the mirror's cracks began to shimmer with a strange light, I whispered the truth I'd learned through fear and pain, through loss and hope. We are not the shattered. We are the shards, each a part of the whole, reflecting a truth too vast for any one of us to hold alone. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.